I'm CTO of Scrumconnect, a consultancy which we primarily provide services to various government departments, DWP and MOJ at the current time. I come from a development background myself, so 27 years experience as back-end developer.
Excellent. Last but not least, Dan.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Daniel Leakey. I'm Business Change Director for a consultancy called Difrent. We work primarily in health and public sector across a pretty wide range of government departments, but also in the third sector as well, working with charities.
Excellent, thank you. So the first question I want to start with is, what are the main changes that you've seen over the last few kind of weeks and months within the public sector? Dan, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think the biggest change I think that's happened over the last couple of months is pace of change. Now, I've worked in government for far longer than I care to admit, in various different guises and various different departments, both consulting and as a civil servant. And it's the one consistent thing about the public sector is everything is always changing. However, the one constant throughout all of that change is that it takes a long time. Now, what I've noticed certainly in the NHS over the last couple of months is that if something needs to change now, it will be changed by this afternoon, and that all of the barriers and the bureaucracy in some cases that have existed, there have been ways found to overcome and overcome at speed, and those are the sorts of things that they were in the too difficult box previously, but faced with this, I'm going to be the first one to use the word unprecedented time. Much more inventive, much more creative ways have been found to get things done. So that's the biggest change for me, is the pace of change.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think we'll kind of unpick that and come on to that a bit later on in terms of like what's actually influencing that and how departments are making decisions so much quicker than they have historically. Mark, what about yourself?
We haven't seen a huge amount of change. I mean, obviously, different projects work at different, speeds, etc. like that there. And I do appreciate sort of what Dan's saying, over the various years in government. But I mean, for example, in DWP, we're still seeing the cogs of government working. Our team on seasonal payments, they've been sort of given the go-ahead, to pay out £13 million worth using a digital service this year. So for winter fuel payments, things like that within MOJ. The project is carrying on, at its normal pace, which is the hectic level, for the simple fact that they're continuing to deliver, the current MVP. The thing that's slowing us down, I think, on that at the end, will be how we actually roll that service out to courts. So because people aren't in physical courtrooms, then we can't get early adopters, etc. So I think the program are finding that to be, the next challenge that they're having to deal with.
Yeah, interesting. Kevin?
Yeah, so I guess echoing what the other two guys have said, I think for me there's a piece as well around, we've talked a lot about carers and people in the NHS who've really done an amazing job. I think across the public sector, actually, there's a lot of people have stepped up and made things happen really quickly within there, and they should really be applauded for it. I mean, things like we were involved in the HMRC job retention scheme, and that spun up and happened phenomenally quickly, like we've never seen before from that. So I think there's been a real step up in terms of people's pace and desire to want to make things happen quickly because we've kind of had to. Yeah.
I'm actually wondering whether some of this comes from, I'll be the first to say the B word, Brexit, and whether or not, the unknowns that were constantly happening there and the changing within sort of the government departments and sort of scrum teams and having to look at different things very, very quickly, whether or not that attitude has simply prepared us for this situation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess what is it that departments are doing to like enable themselves to change? And if that makes sense, I guess if it's taken so long before to get things approved and decisions made, what's kind of changed and how are they now kind of making these decisions so quickly?
I think there's been I guess obviously there's been an impact of COVID, so they've had to. For me, there's kind of three phases or three elements. There's been a react phase, which is, right, something unprecedented has happened, we've got to do something about that. There's kind of a phase I feel we're in at the moment, which is kind of a recover phase, which is, okay, how do we then adapt? What scenarios do we plan for? How do we put new policies and procedures in place? And then there's this piece around looking forward and rethinking, which I really hope we do in terms of the way we deliver stuff. But in terms of it's been, obviously COVID's the enabler to make that change happen. But it's really opened my eyes, I think, as Dan said as well, in terms of having dealt with public sector for years and understand it's not agile as we know agile in terms of a technology development approach, but it has become, and it has had to adapt really quickly in a lot of ways.
Also, I mean, as the three of you will know, we had this very short discussion beforehand. I think part of this, the reason why things are changing so quickly, is that every government department has lifers within the civil service, and they know people have been in 30, 50 years, which is great for them, and it's great for the civil service as a whole. But sometimes they can really slow down the change because they're not willing to adapt and to change. And I think this is forcing them to have to think in that way, and sometimes they're probably having to delegate to people who are much more agile and much more able to think with the speed of change that's needed.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been a combination of sort of drivers and enablers that have facilitated all of this. So if you take sort of the drivers over the last couple of years, it's been Brexit planning, it's been no deal preparations. And there was always sort of an elongated timescale for those things to be taken into account. Whereas with this, it's as a COVID-19 response. Most of these projects have the word emergency at some point in their title, and that's a real driver. But what I think the sort of the enablers behind it is because of the situation of COVID-19, of people not being able to go into offices, not being able to sit physically in meeting rooms and think rather than make decisions. There are lots of new technologies being brought in. And so I don't just mean the likes of video calling. I mean, using interactive tools online that previously they would never even have thought of, using online whiteboarding, for instance. It's just a real simple, easy thing to do. But people just have never ever needed to do it before, so they've never thought about it. So those by looking into those different channels of ways of working, that's enabled them to have much shorter term focus when it comes to delivery. So rather than planning for something that's going to happen over the course of the next financial year, they've had to think about how do we deliver something that the minister is telling me I need by the end of the week. So it's a much shorter project. It's a much clearer deliverable. And so it needs much more flexible ways of working to get to it.
Yeah. And what do you think the key lessons that I guess consultancies and departments can learn from this? And do you think that they will kind of implement those, and will they become like BAU moving forward?
There are some things, if I may, there are some things that I absolutely desperately hope will become business as usual going forward. There are some things that I hope absolutely wither on the vine very quickly when it comes, certainly in terms of procurement. So everybody in whichever side of the fence you sit on in our industry knows that there are practices and problems in terms of procurement. There will always be a network that operates outside of the procurement channels. What I think we've seen over the last couple of months is that some of those have been, those channels around the procurement channels have been very high traffic. There has been some, certainly within the NHS, there has been some very necessary speedy recruitment and procurement goings on, but it has been very open to audit and to challenge about the way it's been done. So I think that there's, speaking as somebody who helps to run a consultancy, there is, we all love it when somebody picks up the phone or an email to us and says, "Oh, guess what? We've got something coming. We think you'd be great for it." Every agency loves that. Anybody who says they don't get involved in that sort of stuff, they just wish they did. But we all want, let's be clear, a much fairer playing field when we come to bidding for stuff through procurement channels. And I think that the speed of procurement is something that I don't think we'll ever go back to being as long-winded as it once was. I don't think we'll ever see the months of deliberation for things to happen again, because it's been shown that things can happen in days and weeks now. And so whilst I think there's some bad practice that needs to disappear, I think there's some good experience and learning that can be taken forward.
I think for those already, consultancy that are already in place, I think that the clients are actually seeing that they can trust them more as well. I think there's before there was obviously a culture of bums on seats, within government, and it's always best, to if you can't see someone, then they're not working, that kind of thing. And I think there's now an element of trust coming through, because for example, the developers that we have, the commute time that they're no longer spending, they're actually investing that into their work time. So, one of our guys, I had to laugh that, because he was telling me in one of my one-to-ones with him that he doesn't just set an alarm to start work in the morning like we all have, but he actually sets an alarm to finish work, because he knows that he could just carry on working, ad infinitum. So I had to laugh, but I genuinely thought that that's a little trick that I might actually implement myself. Time box work, because there are so many other things, and we're all finding sort of the opportunities to integrate with family and everything is great. And I guess a lot of consultants will have spent a lot of time away from home over the years. So I know certainly for myself, it's refreshing to have a prolonged period of time at home, and I think going back into that kind of traveling around, etc., will be difficult to adjust to.
I think to echo that as well, Mark, I think we've found that trust element has been really interesting, both internally as well, because I think departments have had to trust their own workforce to actually get on with things, and we found that in projects that are in flight and ongoing, actually we're all in this together. So in a way, it's pulled us closer to the clients, I would say, and we really are all one big team trying to fathom out how we make this work remotely, how we carry on working while there's some kids running around in the background. We're all in the same boat, and everyone's really understanding of that. And I think that human element is really, really helpful everyone together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine it must be a real shift for the government departments, like actually having people working remotely. I know for myself, come more from like a recruitment point of view, speaking to HMRC or MOD, the kind of consensus you have to be on site 4 to 5 days a week. And it'll be interesting to see whether post-COVID that does change, or whether they do kind of return back to those old ways of working. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, how are departments coping with not having people on site? Are they taking advantage of like different tools and everything else to make it work, or?
I think there was a serious nervousness at the beginning, as in this will be a 2-week trial sprint, and that we've really got to be careful, and everybody has to, make sure all the consultancies that are in the program sort of, have to make sure that they're on top of everything. And it's a case of that, government legislation or government policy, whatever, forcing everybody to be in lockdown, force them to kind of change their attitude. But I think gradually they're learning to live with it. I think there will be an element of relief whenever a large number of people get back into an office scenario. And I certainly wouldn't want to lose that. It definitely has its benefits. Working from home has its benefits too, particularly whenever people are forced to do it like we are now. But I think there's always been a certain element of every sort of discipline within working that would take the mick, if for want of a better term, when working from home. There will be some people that will have the TV on in the background, that will be slightly more lax than what they are in the office, and that's always a risk. I think this time people know, consultants, etc., know that their jobs are actually at risk, because they are being monitored much more closely, because people can't physically see them in the office. So I think that's encouraging them to have a dedicated professional environment, even though, as Kevin says, sometimes in meetings and there are some kids running about in the background. I actually one of our sort of the program members got in touch with me recently and said, look, some of your team, particularly one particular member, it's a little bit too much background noise. Could you have a word? So instead of challenging that one person, I sent out a general email, or general message to everybody in Slack and email. I got 3 instant replies of people worried it was them. It wasn't any of them. But one guy was saying that his parrots had babies, and that in such a small flat. So, it's like, it just shows how the world is changing whenever parrots having babies becomes a problem in an office scenario.
Yeah, I think we've noticed some big changes. I think that if I focus on some of our government clients, departments like the Department of Work and Pensions, and they're not one of the worst by any means, but there's always been an element of, no, you can't do this remotely. This has to be done on site because security. And there was never any clarity on that. There was never any challenge on it. This was, these were secure servers. This was secure Wi-Fi. This had to be done over LAN. And even at the start of this outbreak, we had some of our developers in Newcastle who were working for the Department of Work and Pensions had no option to work from home until the lockdown was made official. So we got ahead of the game with our staff. In the first week of March, we moved to a work from home first model. Before any of the government departments were telling people to do it, we were saying to our clients, we want our people to work from home. And it wasn't easy. In the instance of the Department of Work and Pensions, it was an absolute no. Our developers needed to be on site 5 days a week. They had to use the secure LAN. They had to be on the secure servers. And then 2 weeks later, when the lockdown properly kicked in, it was a case of, right, let's work out how we can make this happen. And those are questions that had never been asked before. So, and that's where I think that's going to be one of the major changes. So when we come out of this and we go back into the new normal, they're not going to remove that capability. They're not going to lessen that flexibility and those extra layers of security that they've managed to invent and to implement. Those aren't going to be taken away. The cost of desks is very expensive. There was a survey done, and I'm going back to when I was in the Ministry of Defence years ago. There was a survey done that said that the cost of a desk in Whitehall was, at that time, I think it was around about £33,000 a year. And that's before you put a person on it. That's just a desk in a building with access, lights, the basics. Now, when you realise that you can run basically all of Whitehall without those desks in Whitehall, there's been moves for years through the Government Estates Department to push work out into hubs, into regions, to be an employment driver in cities. But now the government can be an employment driver in people's homes. And that's something that I think is going to definitely stick. There's no way in the world I can see IT departments being actively encouraged to make work more restrictive going forward.
And the other thing that's actually going to bring is it's going to open it up so much more for people with disabilities or conditions that they don't have to travel. That you don't have to have an accessible building, which from the 1960s, which would cost a lot of money to replace, just so that you can give someone the opportunity is to work. So I think it's an opportunity as well to open up the employment bracket that is of people that we're able to consider.
Yeah, no, I'd echo both of those points. We've had the scenario with the local authority where traditionally they had some desktop applications, which meant everyone had to be in the office to use them. There was no way anyone could work from home. And by this coming along, incredibly, we've managed to look at it and say, okay, actually there is a way we can do this. There is a way we can work around this. And we've sort of proven the model, haven't we, that people don't necessarily have to be. I mean, one of the big pieces for me is we've done I'm sure you guys have as well, we've done the whole inception of a project remotely, and to me that was something that had to be done in the room traditionally. And my way of thinking was you had to have the whiteboard on the wall, you had to be able to do that, and actually proven that okay, maybe it doesn't work in all circumstances, but in some cases it can be done remotely. We can use remote whiteboards. We can, run it as a series of meetings, make them shorter so everyone gets enough breaks, so they're not staring at the screen constantly. But there's ways of working that we've proven can work, which I think should and can change the way that we all work.
Just sorry, Steve's asked the question there. I actually don't think that it will roll out permanently, that pretty much the whole of government will be working from home, or even the whole of government IT departments will be working from home. I think it's a healthy culture to be in an office. I've had clients, in fact, Dan was talking earlier about working completely remote, before we joined the call. And it would be interesting, I guess, Dan, for you to tell that, because of how difficult it is necessarily to interact.
Yeah, so as Mark said, I was chatting to previously how the challenge of working from home, how it's affected me. And I've been on and off doing work from home probably for the last 5 years, but there is a difference now to then. So when I was part of a fully remote team working for a client who were fully on site, it was a very different relationship. So we in Bed, we're a blended team. We have people from the agency, we had specialists brought in from outside the agency as contractors and consultants, and you have the in-house team from the department who's working with. When you are that off-site element, there are things that you will miss. There will be meetings that you dial into over a conference phone that you don't necessarily hear all of the people in the room that well. There will be things that get scribbled on a wall while you're at the other end of a video call and you can't read them. And there will be nuances from the people in the room that you will miss. And that then makes it much more difficult to do. When you move the common denominator to everybody being remote, then the challenge is equal for everybody. So things, as Kevin mentioned there, the onboarding of a new team onto a new project being done remotely, everybody's equal. Everybody has a chance to ask the same questions. Everybody hears the same information. Everybody learns the same things. And therefore, the platform is much more open to challenge. So in response to Steve's question, do I think it will be common for public sectors to move fully remote? No, I don't. I don't think that will happen ever. There are certain, there are parts of government that aren't even connected to the internet for security reasons. So, you can't access a top secret terminal in the Ministry of Defence unless you're sat beside it. And that's never going to change. There are huge elements of critical national infrastructure that even the digital elements of those will need to be done on site for security reasons. So do I think that the whole of the public sector can go remote? Absolutely not. Do I think that huge sections of it will have the option to be remote? Yes. It's been common for years in public sector offices to have 60% desk allocation, so that people work from home 1 or 2 days a week, and then the hot desking model shares out. Everybody on this call's probably worked in a hot desk environment. Everybody knows everybody sits in the same chair every day, and that you end up with enough desks for everybody, and everybody works at home on a Friday or a Monday. That's, GDS, when I worked there a few years ago, was a ghost ship on a Friday. There was nobody there. And that was the flexible working model. Now, GDS was well ahead of the game in that aspect. Lots of remote tools in place, lots of, nobody had a desktop, nobody had a desk phone. But everybody came into the office, pretty much, unless they had, if there was any reason for a meeting, then that meeting would probably happen in person. Do I see that going back? Not really, no. I think there will be huge amounts more of working from home. When you look at organisations like Twitter, saying their people will be able to work from home forever if they want to, it's the if you want to element that will be slightly different in the public sector. There will be, you can work from home if you can, rather than if you want to. I think that's going to be much more prevalent. I definitely think that big tech companies like Twitter making statements like that will drive the cost of property down. I think the office property bubble that has been growing and growing through the likes of WeWork over the last few years. Speaking personally, our lease is up in our office in June and we won't be renewing it because if we can operate for 2 months well as a team without an expensive head office, then we will continue to do so. What we will do is bring in flexibility. So we'll have models where we can have access to offices when we need to do face-to-face things. Those things will reduce going forward. because you've got a nice comfortable space to go and sit in and do stuff, go and sit in a nice comfortable space and do stuff. If you don't have it, you work out ways to do it differently. So the flexibility for venues, facilities, and things like that will change.
Yeah. And just on the sorry, go on, Mark.
No, I was going to say there's probably also the problem where there are some people who can't work from home long term because they're in cramped scenarios. You know, it's uncomfortable. You know, it's good. You know, probably maybe if they can work away from or move back to home to work, but coming in a rented flat, etc., or even sort of, you know, people coming from overseas and living in relatively small flats, maybe with families around them, then, you know, they will probably relish getting back into the office.
Yeah. Just on the project, going back to what it's saying when we project initiation and that kickoff phase, that's usually something that's done in the office. Is there any collaboration tools or software, any tips or tricks that you would like to share that's enabled you to do that remotely? I guess if that is quite a challenging thing, something usually done on site.
Well, it's something that we offer. I think I've jumped in on Kevin now. I think I've got him while he was breathing. But so we've our agent, my agency and Kevin's agency have actually collaborated on a project that had an online inception. And Kevin was closer to it to me, so I'll let him address that specifically. But the tools, we're on one now. Video conferencing in whatever format it takes, whether it's Google Hangouts, Zoom, Starleaf, Teams. I had one day while I was doing some work for NHSX a couple of weeks ago where I used 7 different conferencing platforms in one day. The less said about WebEx, the better. But it's other tools such as Miro for whiteboarding, and silly little things such as Slack call with their pencil tool and being able to annotate things while you're sharing a screen with people. It's little things like that really make a difference to how you can collaborate online. Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. It's great. And I think as well, I mean, it's interesting for me to think the tools that we've got now, if this had happened even 5 years ago, 8 years ago, we'd have been in an entirely different place in terms of how we'd have made it work and whether we could have made it work. But yeah, as you say, we collaborated together, Dan and I's organisations on Inception. I was talking to some of the guys at the end of it. We were having a sort of wash up a lessons learned for how do we do this going forward if we need to. And as Dan said, there's a myriad of video conferencing tools that we can use. That's great. There are tools like Miro where you can do the whiteboarding. I think our guys found Zoom good because you can do the breakout rooms, so we can have smaller groups talking about specific areas within it, but you're all still in that collaborative space, if you will. And I think the other piece which came across, they were saying that after a few days of doing it, they found that people were getting fatigued from physically looking at a screen all day. So they realised that actually what we needed to do was condense some of the sessions into, say, 40 minutes. Just let people go and get a cup of tea, go and let them stretch their legs, let them just clear their mind and then come back to it. And that made us far more productive overall than just sitting looking, because we all know what it's like. You can jump from meeting to meeting to meeting at the moment and sitting with your laptop all day, and that's not a good place to be.
Do you have any final?
Sorry, just one thing I think is really important to what Kevin alluded to there, which is that you have to take into account people's environment. I've got people who work for me who never seem to be in the same place twice when I have a video call with them, and that's because they're moving around the house from wherever their kids aren't. I had one of my delivery managers on a call the other day, and I was like, "Are you in bed?" He said, "I'm in the bedroom, I'm not in bed." Because the kids are terrorising the front room, the dog's going mad in the kitchen. This is the only quiet room in the flat. So, people need breaks. It's easy to, if you're in a physical meeting room, you can see when people are starting to shift in their seats. You can spot people yawning. You can see people looking at their empty coffee cups. You know that that's time to take a comfort break. It's really difficult when you've got a schedule full of video calls back to back to say, hang on, I need to go to the loo, because it's just not. you know, no qualms at all about just standing up and saying, look, back in a minute from a meeting room. But it's weird to leave a screen where you normally sit. So that consciousness of people's environment and being sensitive to people's needs is one of the biggest tools to making online collaboration work at the moment.
Mark, do you have any final thoughts on that at all?
Nothing about inception of a project, but the whole taking breaks, as well as, you know, group catch-ups. We've got 52 developers on one MOJ project, and I have actually picked up the phone, not done a video call, so I've kind of gone old school. And you can actually hear the change in people's voices. Oh, it's a phone call. You know, I can close my eyes, you know, or I can be doing other things in the background. And I think people have appreciated that. And literally, I mean, it obviously takes time to speak to everybody for 5 minutes, 52 people for 5 minutes. You know, it can't all be done in 1 week with all of the other meetings to go around. So over 3 to 4 weeks, I get a cycle, and then I start the cycle again. It's kind of like the painting in the Forth Road Bridge. But forcing people to take breaks from the screen, or encouraging them to. I think the group of people within our delivery teams that I find are the most likely not to take breaks are actually the tech leads, because they you know, they have certain roles to do with architects and business analysts and analysing things, but then they also feel you know, responsible for their teams. And it's not just our developers in the teams, you know, obviously they're testers and the front end developers. So they tend to start, you know, so like 7 o'clock in the morning and finish at 7 at night, and have meetings throughout the day, just simply so that the top and the tail of that day actually allows them to do their own work, because they have to deliver as well, or their job is at risk, you know. So I think just simply encouraging people to have a lunch break, you know, and to have 5 minutes away from the screen every now and then, even if it's just to go and, you know, shout at the kids or play with the kids or whatever it is. So, you know, my kids are all teenagers, so they don't come and see me unless they actually want to buy something off Amazon. You know, so that doesn't interfere with my working day, but I can see how I'm glad I don't have young children at this particular time at home. So it would be an extra strain to deal with.
Yeah. I know when we were speaking before, by the sounds of things, a lot of that team at the MOJ that you mentioned, they had actually been onboarded remotely, and it sounds like Scrumconnect were quite forward thinking actually in terms of like the ways of working and processes like prior to this happening.
Yeah. I mean, we out of those 52, basically we had taken over from the 3 incumbent suppliers on the project. 40 were pretty much, you know, on site before lockdown. So we brought 12 in over the last probably month, maybe to 6 weeks. Some of those are people with the clear groups, actually, people with program experience, so that we've either been able to sort of bring back from elsewhere, so or move from other parts of the program and bring in. So their onboarding was quite easy, you know. So there's no technical overview, but ordinarily, whenever outside lockdown, we have a very social interaction, and we always have an agile coach at our sort of first induction whenever we get a group in. We kept that going. Nell Mathams is a great agile coach, and she's been working with us, so she's done 2 or 3 now of these onboarding sessions where ordinarily they would all play with Lego, and you know that there, but she's changed it, and she's been able to adapt it in different ways, and it's great to see in a 2-3 hour session, some people go from complete strangers to actually colleagues before they join their team. So I would recommend that, you know, I personally thought, you know, how on earth, you know, is an agile coach going to work, you know, on a screen with a bunch of people who don't know each other and get them interacting? Genuinely surprised, and sort of, you know, sort of give Nell a big up. That's one of the things whenever we go back out of lockdown, I'm looking forward to, because we've now got a whole bunch of people who we haven't taken out for lunch. So everybody on their first on their first day, whenever they join with us, we take the whole group out. So every 6 to 8 weeks, we have a full team retrospective. So we get, in the past, all 40, but now all 52, get them into a conference room, and we tend to do that at the end of an induction. So we organise pizzas and everything, and so people those guys are getting a break from their work. It's their lunch hour or whatever, so we're feeding them. But they're getting to see new people, and they're getting to hear in the retrospective problems that are happening in the project, wins that are happening in the project, and just get to see who they might like, or who they might like to get to know outside their team as well, and who they can go to for advice. So what we've done during this sort of lockdown period, anybody new joins is assigned one or more buddies. So, and we actually create a Slack channel for them where, I'm involved in that. So if there's anything that isn't technical that I can help address, so it takes the pressure off the buddies as well. But the buddies are able to point them in a direction, and gradually those little communities grow, because maybe the buddy hasn't had this particular problem, but somebody else has. So we introduce that person into the group as well. So, and we found it working really well. So, it has our onboarding. We now measure it much sort of more accurately. We have literally have a spreadsheet that says, have you done, these 13 things? If you have, you're now ready to go into your team and be productive. And then it's kind of working with the DM and the tech lead at that point to make sure that, that they're actually up to speed and being given tasks that don't require sort of too much business knowledge. But it's all about the interaction and all about, sort of making sure that people are able to talk. And I think that's where the office environment has its definite pros when bringing people on. So,
Yeah.
I think, I think we found that as well with the sort of obviously remote onboarding is a whole new experience for us around there. And I think I was talking to a lady who joined us a week or so ago, and we'd done the program of series of meetings and meeting the team and going through pieces like that. But you're absolutely right, Mark. It's that element of just being in the office and, I don't know, grabbing a cup of coffee and you introduce yourself to them, or that piece that it's really hard to reinvent that remotely, and you've got to work harder, I think, to do that when you're doing it remotely.
One of the other things that we actually do is we started out doing it with a permanent staff, and in the past week or so we've been rolling it out to contractors as well. We actually have sort of designated coffee mornings, 15-minute slots, where we get people together, and we actually, it's hard getting them not to talk about work. So, sort of they say, oh, I did this story, or I've done this, or we're working, I'm not interested in that in these 15 minutes. This is kind of around the water cooler kind of thing, where, do you have any secrets, that you're using, and what skills are you learning outside? Some people are playing badminton with their daughter. Other people, with the kids, or they've bought a little mini keyboard and they're learning to play keyboard with the kids. It's just great, to kind of see that. Some people are taking up running and things like that. So it's interesting to learn more about people in those kind of environments as well.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've consciously done as well. So not just internally, but on client side as well. So we've got at 1:30 every day, our teams with one of our clients, they have a lunch break where they sit and chat for half an hour while they eat. Videos off most of that time. 11 o'clock every day we have an internal coffee video chat, and this is usually where I pick the laptop up, shift to the kitchen, and stand up for 15 minutes and talk instead of sitting at my desk and doing it. But again, work talks ban in that. We've put in video personal training sessions for some of our staff. So one of our staff, their partner is a personal trainer who's not doing anywhere near as much work as they would normally do. Volunteered to do some online personal training sessions live for our people, and it's things like that, little things that are non-work related to make a big difference to how work is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think mental health is like a really big part of this as well, isn't it? And I think obviously everyone being at home, some people are living by themselves and not having that human contact. It is like a real shift for people to get used to.
We've actually had just before lockdown, we had a sort of a 2 or 3 sort of guys come over from India, and just sort of tier 2 visa that's really good, it's very skilled, but their families were just about to join them. Then lockdown happened, and then of course you can see the difference between someone in that situation compared to somebody who their family, for example, we have another couple, actually both of them, you know, sort of the husband and wife are on the project, and they brought their young son over, and that relationship is obviously different, or the interaction with them is obviously different. They're less stressed, things like that. So you just have to really be careful, you know, because but we're in a particularly male-dominated sort of like industry, which is not a good thing at all. But male mental health is coming more and more to the fore in just in general. So, you know, in all the media. So I think this is, as Kevin said earlier, you know, we might not have been able to do this 4 or 5 years ago. I think there might have been an awful lot more breakdowns if it had been 4 or 5 years ago. And so, you know, if that kind of thing hadn't been in the open.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think the kind of environment now with, we're talking about remote working, I guess breaking down these barriers and with all this collaborative tech, do you think there's an opportunity for the industry to like increase its diversity? Because now we can actually accommodate and I guess appeal to different people. We've got different working patterns, different situations.
Yeah, I think there's, I think it's fair to say a lot of particularly SME size organisations are working hard at diversity anyway, and yeah, have already been on that game really. I think yeah, the piece that can really help, I think it was Mark that mentioned it earlier, was working from home does open that up. So people that maybe not able to travel as much could potentially do roles. Yeah, it certainly opens the opportunities up there for people, definitely.
Also, people with childcare issues, you know, whether they be sort of single fathers or single mothers, you know, if they don't have to do an hour's commute at either end of the day, that, you know, they can almost fit in a full day's work. So, you know, into the normal working hours. So there's an opportunity there, yeah, and people with disabilities or certain needs that may need to take breaks throughout the day regularly because they can't cope with sitting in one place or sharing a screen. There's certainly opportunities there for them. It's nice to see Rich actually has comment, you know, about sending little morale gifts to everybody. So I'll be honest with you, we've kind of done that. If you want, secretly within our thing, I sent all our perms a personalised card, you know, sort of thank God for Moonpig. You know, so you know, it's really are these little things, and it's good to see sort of, you know, other sort of companies like, you know, sort of Rich's, etc., really doing that. I actually am very aware as well. We haven't answered Rich's previous question about the DOS4 framework.
Just before I'm keen to answer Rich's first question as well, but I think it's the term flexible working has been bandied around for years, and flexible working meant part-time in reality most of the time. Whereas flexible working now means that I've got one of my guys who works for me, he works from 7 in the morning until 12. And then he looks after the kids until 3, half 3. And then he does a bit more work from sort of 3:30, 4 o'clock until 7 o'clock. And his wife is looking after the kids when he's working. And they're juggling that home life that way. And I think that's the sort of flexible working that will be more likely to stick, I think, as well.
I agree.
Who wants to tackle Rich's question first?
I'll have a little dig at that one. So I tend to be one of the people from my agency that's all over the DOS4 bits as part of my life. And it's been very interesting to see the amendments and things that are being made to procurements at the moment. Things like minimum of 80% on-site working are caveated with statements like, oh, of course, at the moment, everything's off-site, so that's fine. Do I see the chances of there being more fully remote projects going forward? Absolutely. Will that? We work with clients that have got a requirement for, I think one of them is 60% on-site working. So our guys tend to be on site from from Tuesday to Thursday, because there's some travel involved for some people. But the building doesn't have facilities to have all those people in all of the time. So they have days where, because they're on a remote site, they need to drive in. There's no public transport to get to where they are. So their car park is nowhere near big enough for the amount of people that work in that office. So they have non-driving days, which become non-office days. restrictions on infrastructure like that are what I think people are now realising, if they have more flexibility in how they engage, certainly with suppliers, but also with their own people, that this requirement for 60, 80, 100% on-site engagement, the eyes have been opened in the public sector, for me, 100%, that this isn't necessarily as valuable as it was previously perceived to be.
I think it's all about the attitudes of the higher civil servants, seeing that things work, rather than the people who are, you know, in a job for life, have sat at the same desk in the same seat, and you know, and have their own patch, if you want. It's those kind of people where we will have the problem. Sort of changing their attitudes, but hopefully they will have learned something from this. So I think sort of the MOJ project that we're on, there is a need to be inside the UK to access the network, so through the VPN, which I think is the kind of good restriction, because I think what you might find, because everybody doesn't talk to everybody, you know, that some consultancies may come in and say, okay, this bit can be done offshore. Yeah. And then all of a sudden that changes the whole dynamic. So it's all about having control, but working from home is not the same. Having a team that works sort of working from home is different from having a team that's offshore, and all of the caveats that come with that, and the difficulties that come with ensuring quality, etc.
I think as well, just to build on that, I think the longer this goes on, the stronger the case is that actually we've proven this model, that things can, you know, we don't need to be 80%, 100% on site. We've proven that this can be done. And yeah, I think there'll be a fallback in some respects. I don't think there'll be, but particularly, I can't see any of our projects particularly being fully remote going forward. But by the same token, I think things will be much more flexible the longer this goes on.
Yeah. So we're almost coming up to 10 to. So if anyone has got questions, then please do submit them via the chat. I wanted to ask, what predictions would you make about how public sector is going to change over the next 5 years?
Now I have to get my crystal ball out. If I get this wrong, my CEO will be listening. I'm absolutely certain of it. I think that the demand on the public sector is going to be the biggest change. The funds are going to be vastly decreased for public sector. I think there's, you know, whilst everything that's been done to support individuals and support business has been fantastic by this government, I can't, I've got a lot of friends who live all around the world, and I can assure you that there are very, very few governments taking as much effort to try and support people economically. I can't necessarily comment on everything else that's going on, but economically, we've been very fortunate, I think, in the way that our government's reacted. However, I am hugely conscious that this has to be paid for sooner or later in one way or another. Now, 12 years of austerity will look like a picnic if we have to pay this back in anything less than a couple of generations. It's going to be that level of impact. You know, when you look at the funding of a massive, hugely expensive government department like Ministry of Defence, you're talking 400 Ministry of Defences being paid for at the moment this year. And it's unheard of investment in terms of how government and civil service has been run. So the demand from the public is being raised by this. There is a much more responsive nature to the public sector at the moment. Things happen faster. Things are happening to, in my opinion, certain elements are happening to a better quality. And that expectation level will be raised. So the public demand will be greater for public services. The infrastructure behind a lot of public sector stuff will be vastly improved as a result of the work that's gone on now, and that will be a legacy that will be hugely beneficial. But the budget and the operating costs for these departments will drop dramatically. The spending reviews coming in the next few years will be absolutely brutal, and necessarily so, because this is the generational bill that we're building up, and it will have to be covered somehow.
Yeah, I think there was in the financial crisis, there was very much a challenge for local authorities in terms of the public demand for digitisation and for wanting more services online and things like that were ever increasing. But at the same time, local authorities were fighting this lack of funding and lack of budget. And it's almost like a replication of this in central government now going forward, as Dan says. Yeah, definitely. There's going to be savage cuts to budgets. There is. And the prioritisation of which projects, what things do we actually transform, which are the legacy applications, for example, that we really, really need to do something with, that we can't sit on. My fear is that there will be an element of slowdown in some of the digital transformation and some of the really great work that we're doing. My hope is that this has shown that actually doing some of that work can actually fundamentally change the way we interact with government departments. So there is almost here an opportunity to say, if we get this right, we can change the way that we work with government departments, which ultimately has savings down the road. But yeah, it's whether we can fund that.
I'll be honest with you. I think it's almost an impossible question, because I'm not convinced that we know what's going to happen by the end of this year,
well,
or actually, to be honest, none of us even know when we're going to be back in the office. I mean, you would assume that if somebody said September, we would all pretty much raise our hands to that. But whether it's the beginning of September, the end of September, or whether that slips, I would seriously doubt it would come in. So there is just so much chaos, if you want, going on. There's too many balls in the air being juggled at the minute. But I do think particularly in this country, and I think we have a very good industry. I think we have people with extremely good skills, and I think over the last probably 5 to 10 years, with the government transformation projects that have been going on, an awful lot of skills and an awful lot of people with very good experience are coming through. And thankfully some of those are in the likes of GDS or have moved around multiple government projects. So there is a benefit, and I think agencies or consultancies now have the opportunity to work together to a lot stronger standards.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of heeding your answers there, but not to ask the same question in a different way. Do you think there's any like technology that's coming down the track which maybe is going to disrupt government? I don't know whether like automation, AI, things like that would actually be a big cost saver, and maybe like an incentive if they could implement these things, it's going to make massive savings as opposed to like big investments. I don't know whether that's likely to happen, or is there any particular tech you're excited about coming down?
I think there's we do, as I mentioned at the start, we do a lot of our work in health, and a lot of we've been involved in a lot of the COVID-19 emergency response stuff with NHSX. One of the things that I'm highly conscious of is that I don't think the health service will ever operate in the way that it did before. I have a nurse practitioner who lives next door, who has barely left her house since the start of the lockdown, is seeing easily as many patients as she normally would in the surgery, but she's seeing them in much more detail and much more in depth. She's able to take more time with people. It's the technology that's simple, that's having a massive effect on established ways of working within the NHS, such as video calling, such as the NHS 111 triage. There's been lots in the news about the reduction in footfall into A&E departments, and everybody said the assumption is that everybody's terrified of getting COVID-19 if they go to a hospital. But the reality is people are using a lot more different channels. So they're getting diagnosis, they're getting symptoms checked online, they're using video calls with their GP and some sort of things that they wouldn't necessarily have done before. And I think that's probably the simple technology that's going to change things. More complex things such as AI, patient monitoring, remote technology and things like that, I think those will be definitely a factor going forward. The integration of data into systems, I think, is probably going to be one of the biggest benefits, because if you want to do online remote monitoring of people's health, you need to be able to share data, and previously that's something that the NHS has been terrified to do, and has had some scares over data leaks and things when they tried to do bits and pieces in the past. But I think the appetite for risk is increased. I think the ability to work with the technology is increased. And I think the two of those will come together to make real differences when it comes to the use of things like AI.
I think it's not just the ideas of what might happen. It's actually the implementation of how things are done going to play a really big part. I remember reading, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years back about a service in America which monitored people's hearts, remotely. To obviously, there's sort of huge distances in the States, and you would guess that specialists in a primary location can monitor nationally. Of course, they had used a single, Amazon cloud sort of the area, and that went down. So of course, pretty much everybody was dead, or they didn't know. It's come Schrodinger's cat. You don't know if it's alive or dead. So so they had to re-architect very quickly, or go under. And I think if things are going to be shared, going to be implemented correctly, they need to have proper fault tolerance.
Yeah, and I think in terms of emerging technologies, I think a lot of the technology that has potential is already there. I think as we've touched on, it's how we implement it. It's as much as the technology, the ways of working as well, and the ways that the government departments set up to interact with citizens, rethinking really some of the services and the ways we operate. I think is where the real value will come. And I don't think there's a magic wand of saying we can implement RPA and AI and technologies like that, and that will instantly save millions and billions of pounds. I think there's it's using the technology as an enabler, but really rethinking and questioning what are we delivering, what is the value we're actually trying to get from these services, and rethinking those ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's the culture piece and adopting the tech and using it the right way, and all of these things you've spoken about in terms of like new ways of working and using collaborative tools. I guess there's so much there already without even tackling like really new disruptive tech.
But there's also, just before we joined the call, we had the very sort of quick conversation about everybody's home office and having an Alexa in the room, or a TV that listens to your voice. We have to be very careful to make sure that the security problems are dealt with as well. So because you don't know what Google and Amazon are hearing just on the people in this call, sort of every day in their work life. Yeah.
Well, I think we've pretty much finished there for time. So thank you so much to our panelists, and thanks to everyone for tuning in and for submitting questions. Feedback is really important, so please do get in touch with myself, like via LinkedIn or Meetup, and let us know how it went or any things you think could be improved on. And then I think what we'll do is I'll have like a debrief with the panelists, and if there's any key kind of links or any information like collaborative tools or anything else that we think would be useful, maybe we can send something out to the attendee list as well. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. And yeah, Ian, if you send your question through to me, I'll share it with the panelists and then come back to you on that as well. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Cheers.